Herzlich willkommen beim Sprachenforum Nummer 5. Hello and welcome everybody out there. Manche von Ihnen in den Schulen werden sich vielleicht wundern, dass heute nicht meine Kollegin Belinda Steinhuber hier sitzt. Ich bin Andreas Bärnthaler, ich bin im CEBS zuständig für CLIL, and my guest today is Keith Kelly, probably the most popular CLIL trainer here in Austria and abroad. Das Programm für heute konzentriert sich natürlich auf CLIL. Wir werden also Teile von Keith Kellys Vortrag von der CLIL-Konferenz im März des heurigen Jahres noch einmal sehen. Wir werden hier live mit Keith Kelly sprechen und Dinge diskutieren. Sie werden an Ihren Schulen die Möglichkeit haben, in Ihren Gruppen Dinge zu diskutieren, uns Fragen zu stellen, Kommentare über Google Docs zu uns ins Studio hereinzuschicken. Sie können, wie Sie wollen, diese Kommentare in deutscher und in englischer Sprache schicken und Keith Kelly wird sie da live vor Ort sofort beantworten. Keith, may I ask you to say a few words about what you do and who you are?
Sure, I'll be glad to. First, I'd like to say thank you for the invitation. It's such a privilege to participate. It's a privilege to participate because I think, by way of introduction, a few words of my history with Austria. I teach CLIL methodology at the Pädagogische Hochschule in Vienna and participate in a number of other initiatives around the country for CLIL for teachers in Austria. And I've been doing that for several years now. So it does feel like I have a close relationship with what's happening in Austria, and it's a real pleasure to be here. The other hats I wear, I'm an author. I've brought out a book recently with Oxford University Press, putting CLIL into practice. Yeah. And I own and run a school in my hometown Plovdiv in Bulgaria, which I call a CLIL school because the aim and the nature of the school is to learn language while doing something else. And we use science and art and maths and music for developing English with our children and students and adults in our classes.
Yeah, that's just great. Thank you very much. So as I've said before, what we're going to see today is once again parts from your speech, from your keynote, from the CLIL conference, which was kind of a brilliant event, I think.
It was a great event.
It was actually the second Austrian CLIL conference for vocational schools and colleges, and probably some or many of those watching us today could participate in that conference. And well, we'll be waiting for new ideas and stuff to discuss. And I'm really looking forward to what we're going to do this afternoon.
Sure.
I would say we're going to watch the first part of your keynote once again, which was kind of concentrating on CLIL in the past.
Yep.
Probably people watching us will notice that very often you're talking about technical colleges.
Yes.
Yeah? HTL, CLIL in the past, that's what you called this first part of the lecture. Why is that?
Well, we started off with these schools, and as you know, there's interest now in many other types of schools in Austria. The agricultural colleges and the HAC and the HUM schools are involved now too in the training for the teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Das ist vielleicht interessant für manche von Ihnen zu hören, dass wir in den HTLs, ich sage wir, weil ich in einer HTL arbeite, ja mit dieser Sache ganz groß begonnen haben und gestartet haben. Die CLIL sich jetzt ausbreitet in Österreich, inzwischen auch die land- und forstwirtschaftlichen Schulen an diesem Programm teilnehmen und CLIL verpflichtend in ihre Lehrpläne aufgenommen haben. Ich weiß auch, dass Kolleginnen und Kollegen aus land- und forstwirtschaftlichen Schulen heute Nachmittag dabei sind. Und diese Idee auch in den HACs und HUMs natürlich inzwischen aufgenommen wurde und wir werden auch von dort sehr viele Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer heute dabei haben. Okay, so let's go ahead with the first part of your keynote from the CLIL conference in March.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about a number of things. I'm going to talk about CLIL past, I'm going to talk about CLIL now and CLIL future, and I'm going to use my experiences with the course in Vienna and my relationships with teachers there and visits to their schools, and I'm going to talk about their materials they've written and all sorts of aspects of our relationship over the last 5 years to look at the way forward and ask questions about the way forward. In a nutshell, that's what I'm going to do. Andreas is going to wave at me when I've got about 5 minutes left, so we will ask for questions and ideas from you at that point. Oh, so my pointer's not working. That's a great thing. Let's see if the arrow works. Yes, I'm going to basically do this. I'm going to talk about the course that we led and lead still in Vienna. I'm going to look at some of the teachers' work during the course, because I'm very lucky to actually see everything the teachers do, at least in the first 2 modules, because I guide some of them electronically by email, and I offer suggestions and look at the things that they write to do in their classrooms. So I'm going to show some of those examples here. And in the future, I'm going to talk about, I think, important questions for school managers, really. I think for the principals of the schools that are developing CLIL, some of my own personal reflections on the work that I've done with teachers in Austria, and wave a few flags, I think, both green and red, for the future of CLIL. Not just HTL CLIL, but now the HAC and the BAC and the agricultural colleges embracing CLIL in this project, in this network in Austria. The course itself is, I like to think of it as a toolbox for teachers, at least the first 2 modules that I contribute to. I like to think of it as a toolbox because teachers need to mechanically put a lesson together. They need to think about how things fit, how things sequence, how skills work from one to the other. And so talking about a toolbox as a metaphor for teachers is quite a useful one, because in the course when they come, we try to offer them lots of tools and lots of materials to work with. And you can see in Module 1, we look at subject-specific vocabulary, we make decisions about what is essential terminology, what is useful terminology, but could be helpful for the students. And we look at guiding students through input material, whether it's following a PowerPoint slideshow or video or animation. We look at guiding them through that input. And of course, we look at text material too. So I've decided to break down the content into those component parts so that we could examine the mechanics of lessons in that way. And the assignment, of course, is quite a simple one. We ask teachers to consider, during their preparation, to include some of the ideas they've seen. So if they work with media, multimedia, have a look at guiding students through watching and listening as the teacher's presenting, or watching and viewing if it's a video that they've used. In Module 2, we go on then to look at other aspects of language. We look at academic language, which tends to be a bit more invisible in the textbooks and in the curriculum. Certainly not as visible as the subject-specific terminology. So we look at identifying this language and making it accessible to students. As well as that aspect of language, we then go on to look at supporting students' output, so getting students speaking and writing in their content subjects. And again, how the teachers can create support for students when they're asked to talk and write. And my colleagues working with Module 3 and 4 expand on these component parts, looking at sequencing activities in lesson plans and sequencing lessons within series of lessons to produce in the final module a portfolio of work that they can take back to school at the end of the course. That's the course in a nutshell. And I'm glad to say, after meeting colleagues in the Bulma in Graz yesterday, Wolfgang's here somewhere, some of them will be in touch to see if they can get involved in the next course at the PPH in Vienna. Well, classroom dynamics past, what sort of questions do we ask with the teachers in Vienna? Well, we look at the teacher's experience. We frequently get teachers who come with 0 experience of teaching, who've gone perhaps from business or industry directly into schools because of their specialism. And they need a lot of ideas. They need a lot of support on how to manage a classroom. Teachers' language ability. This is very much an issue that's at the heart of the course. And in the brief, it very clearly says that we should be building teachers' confidence in using English in the classroom. And we do that. We do that through the activities that we ask the colleagues to do during the classes, during the sessions. We treat them as students of English while they're talking about teaching their subjects through English. One of the things that I think is a crucial question for all teachers, not just CLIL teachers, is what exactly the lessons ask students to do. What exactly the curriculum demands of students. And it's actually at the heart of those curriculum guidelines that we can begin to identify language demands when we're working in a foreign language. Those Operatoren that are actually sometimes avoided by teachers because they sniff at the curriculum guidelines and they're not really interested, you know. They get on and do their work. Well, have a look at what the demands are of curriculum topics and units within subjects, because therein lies information about the language demands. One of the things that's at the heart of the work that I like to do is to get teachers thinking about getting their students speaking. You know, a lot of the abstract content can be quite passive for students, and the magic of CLIL is looking at how you can create communicative opportunities within the classroom. So, you know, how can we get students talking within abstract content? Professional demands frequently have a need for students to be able to communicate orally. There's a very nice video in YouTube of the German Coast Guard, if you've seen it, and there's an English boat in danger and comes through on the speaker with a novice Coast Guard officer, and the British are shouting, "Help! We're sinking, we're sinking!" And the German Coast Guard officer says, "What are you sinking about?" You know, oral communication is crucial, isn't it, in the professional world? So, of course, the question for the schools, for the CLIL coordinators in school departments and the managers of schools is, what is the right balance? There has to be a balance somewhere. So I'd like to talk about that. And at the back of my mind, I have to say I'm a beginner in this area with German medium curriculum documents, but I have a wonderful document now from Kassel where one of my chemistry colleagues writes a guideline book for teachers on preparing students for chemistry Matura papers. In it, it's full of Operatoren. And, you know, what does it mean when students are asked to analysieren? What exactly does that mean? Teachers must know what that means when they bring this demand into the classroom. There's a lot of language there. So we'll look at that. We do a lot of feedback ongoing in the course, and it's interesting to have a look at some of the things the teachers say they need today and in the past. And teachers often worry about their own English. You know, they worry about their own level of English. And I have to say, you know, your students will never meet Queen Elizabeth. They will never meet Queen Elizabeth. You know, I guarantee it. They will meet Chinese speakers of English, Greek speakers of English, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian speakers of English, Mancunian speakers of English. And what actually your students need is a level of English and skills to help them deal with misunderstanding. They don't need totally accurate English. They need to be able to deal with misunderstanding. And if the focus is always on accuracy, they may lack those skills. The other thing to look at is actually challenges teachers say they have. And a big challenge here you can see is the support they feel they have and the material support they feel they have in schools. They frequently say they don't have the right resources. And part of the course is we help them write resources. Time. All teachers complain about time. And I would say one of the flags I would like to wave here in front of everybody is there are now hundreds of teachers interested in integrating content subjects with language around Austria. How many of you here, for example, are science teachers? Yeah? Do you all know each other? You should. Communicating through networks electronically is so easy these days. It saves time if you're in a group of 10 or so, as put your hands up here. Engineers, I could ask, you know, you should be connected through the internet. You should be part of groups of professionals who are sharing resources. And that may be an Austrian thing. I'm told Austrian teachers don't like to share their stuff. Share, please. Motivation. Another issue colleagues raise is motivation. You know, they themselves don't always feel like they're carrying quite a heavy weight anyway with their curriculum. So part of our job is helping them feel confident and feel good about what they do. Cooperation is part of that, isn't it? There's a group here that are administrative questions, I think. You know, teachers dealing with why do it in English? This question, why CLIL in their schools? And administrative support In some schools I know there's one CLIL teacher. In other schools I know, there's a colleague here from Wiener Neustadt HTL, there I met I think 8 or 9 computer science teachers all working through English. So there's a lot of collaboration possible in a school like that. If you're alone, it's very hard, it's very heavy and very difficult. Personal skills and vocabulary for the teacher, you know, and a lot of this I hope. Courage is also there, daring to do stuff. So I hope we raise the level of confidence of teachers on the course. Some of the benefits, we also have to make me feel happy after the course. And you can see that there is feedback that suggests they feel a boost, they feel confident after the training that we go through. The spirit is mentioned, the atmosphere is mentioned. You could ask the question, why is it only isolated to a meeting in Vienna? Meetings like this, it's so motivating to have all of you together. We have to make it a routine, you know. It was 3 years ago the last time we met. Is it going to be 3 years again? Are we going to meet again? Let's decide, let's make it happen. You know, we have to inspire each other. What have we got here? I have to read it, my glasses on. New ideas, yeah, new ideas. All teachers need ideas, don't they? You know, because we have jobs to do. You know, we get in a routine, we get in a bit of a rut sometimes. So refreshing ideas, we need them to come from somewhere. And I personally feel it's the school principal's job to do this. Your school principals, if they're not involved in your work, tell me about it, please. And I'll phone them.
Okay, Keith, I guess here we are again, live on air.
Back again.
Well, we've seen bits of CLIL in the past. Any comments? Anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I would, because it might look a little bit false the way I break up language skills within a training course. But there's a good explanation for that. I like to talk to content teachers about having a toolkit to work with in the classroom, and in their toolkit they can think of language skills as instruments that they can use and exploit in their own teaching. And you know, whether that's teachers who predominantly stand at the front and lecture and give monologues with a slideshow to accompany their talk, they can think about how the students are listening to them, how the students are following the structures in their talk, you know, and that's one of the focuses on the course that we do in the PPH in Vienna, specifically looking at the mechanics of giving a lecture and how students can be guided through that input content while they're sitting, watching, listening, making notes perhaps. It's all exactly like engineering, you know, how the teacher as the specialist, not only of knowledge, but of the art of classroom dynamics. And the toolkit allows them to exploit the language skills in certain ways. Okay,
let me interrupt you here.
Sure.
If I had a toolkit like that and I open it, what would I find inside?
It's a very good question. I mean, I like to talk with teachers about identifying structure in their input content. So if they're giving a lecture with a PowerPoint slide show, what's the structure of the ideas in the PowerPoint slide show? Do they follow each other logically in a sequence from 1 to 10? Can that structure be taken out and placed in a blank template form to give as a handout to students, so that while they're watching, listening, they can be making notes on the key ideas of the content in the slideshow. So that would be in there, a collection of templates for specific PowerPoint slideshows, and that's one of the things we try to get the teachers to develop their own as part of their assignment work during the course.
Those templates, do they look different depending on which subjects we're talking about? Are they different for engineering stuff?
Well, I think so, yes, because you might divide the social sciences from the natural sciences, and the kind of content structure you find in the natural sciences, for example, tend to be very much process description, or tend to be, you know, characteristic phenomena description of living forms, or processes in nature. So the templates I'm trying to answer your question would follow how the ideas are organized in the content subject, and that does differ from subject to subject. You can imagine in mathematics, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yes.
Nevertheless, the maths itself is highly diagrammatical,
Okay.
and can lend itself very nicely to structuring the thinking process through solving an equation, for example, and embedding language. That's another aspect of CLIL in the past, is getting teachers to think about what language their students need and where the teachers can put it, what they can do to place some of that language within these instruments that they have in their toolkit.
Okay.
I mean, your question about the shapes of these templates, the types of templates that students might need, that would be a great project for engineers together as a group. Let's have a look at the curriculum. Let's have a look at what those structures might be that would enable our students to make notes easily. Because a very good question is who's teaching the students to take notes in the classroom? It's not an obvious answer. In some parts of the world, in the IB program, they have a subject which focuses on study skills and focuses on note-taking skills. Students frequently need help, and that structure can be given that helps them work their way through some input content.
So do you feel that teachers here in Austria, in technical colleges, in commercial colleges, have something like that on their schedule?
Well,
note-taking?
I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I think, I suspect, I may be wrong, but I suspect it's quite a random thing and depends on the knowledge and experience of the individual teachers. I'm not aware of it being on the curriculum itself. I don't know if I'm wrong in thinking that.
Well, I tell my students, you just take notes, you just jot down keywords, but that's it. This is probably not enough. What do you think?
Well, I give an example from my wife's. My wife's a doctor, and while she was a medical student, pharmacology program had a lecture in it on different holinotropic medical substances. And my wife was sitting at home revising this stuff, getting frustrated because she had 20 pages of lecture notes that she'd diligently written down every word the lecturer was delivering during the talk. And I said, can I help? And actually, together, we identified a huge tree diagram in this lecture, which I think would have been useful to give the students beforehand. And maybe get the students to fill in key information during the lecture. As it is, they could have put a tape recorder there or an MP3 recorder and gone and had a coffee and come back and listened to it slowly in their own time. Those structures are crucial in a CLIL context where the language is so demanding. I think as a fundamental, CLIL methodology is about identifying those structures and making them available to students. By default, I think.
Okay. Anything else I'd find in the toolkit?
Well, yes. I mean, we talked about processing visual input. So, PowerPoint slides. The same can be said of video, animation input, or working with objects, working with machinery. It all can be structured in some way. A specialist engineer would approach working with a specific type of machinery in a certain way. And that certain way suggests steps and sequence, structure that the students can use usefully for following ideas and for collecting language. So we can apply that to text. If subjects have a lot of text input in them, are the texts structured on the page in a way which makes them more easily readable? In many cases, they're not, because a lot of schools use books imported from native speaker contexts. And the native speaker contexts are not necessarily written thinking about the non-native speaker reader. They're made for people like me who've had a long education and an academic background, and we can read these things. We can also look at how students are asked to speak and write. In the toolbox, we would have a lot of support ideas for teachers. So teachers who complain their students don't talk enough in English. Well, let's have some ideas in there that force students in a nice way to speak to each other. When I say nice, I mean in a way that the structure makes them have to communicate with each other. And that can be in pairs, it can be as a whole class. And teachers need a lot of these ideas because actually, you know, coming from a business background or an industrial background, they don't have lots of these ideas at their fingertips. And the last area I would suggest is writing. You know, writing doesn't happen in every subject, but where it does, again, we might offer blueprints for writing for students that again would have key language that they need to produce. You know, for an abstract for a matura paper, for example, teachers frequently mention that to me, that their students in their own language struggle in writing these academic pieces of text. And, you know, in a foreign language, the teacher can think about how to make that a bit easier, how to make that, give them the structure and give them some language to get them started, so that their own ideas are written, but the actual content structure is there for them to follow, with introduction, conclusion, you know, an argumentative body of the language, for example. So I'd put all that in there. We could talk about vocabulary as well, working with specific language, ideas for organising this weight of learning for students, new terminology in both English and German. You know, there's plenty of technology out there that makes it easier than when we were at school. We had, you know, vocabulary books where we'd write the English and the German, cover up one side and test ourselves, random lists. Well, today we can thematically organise in maps. So I'd put that in there as well.
Sounds great. Well, looking back and having a look at the present, I remember at the CLIL conference you had that red flag slide on. Could we quickly talk about that? What does the red flag slide tell us?
Well, yeah, it was referring to, I think, kind of key characteristics. You know, teachers worry about a lot of things. Perhaps to start with, the teacher confidence in their own language. You know, that's a red flag, I think, to wave. And part of my job, I see, when I work with teachers in Austria, is to get them to actually see how they do function in English. Much of the time, they worry about their error. They worry about their pronunciation. They don't actually think about how functionally effective they are at working in their subject area. And they usually always are. You know, occasionally we get some colleagues who have very poor pronunciation in English and very limited English, but by and large, the 400 teachers I've met through the courses I've given over the last 6 years in Austria, most of them function completely well in the classroom. And I try and get that message across. You know, part of our work is, and the red flag is building teacher confidence, to know that they can do what they've been asked to do in the classroom. It's not all about being perfectly accurate all the time.
And so it does not necessarily mean that you need a C1 or C2 Cambridge certificate to be a good CLIL teacher, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I do have colleagues in Germany who are content teachers working through English, and they do complain about this kind of an attitude from the language teaching world that their English is not good enough. Well, it is. Believe me, it is. They can and they do teach their chemistry and their other subjects through English very well. Sometimes in ways that creates communicative experiences that are better than what the students meet in the language classroom, because the subject itself creates meaning. You know, and in a way they forget about language because they're talking about a filter press, for example. You know. Other parts of the red flag slide, we talked about method and dynamics, and I think my red flag message there was that the specialist knowledge of the teacher that they have in their own mind is only a part of this relationship in the classroom. Of course, they have to have this specialist knowledge, but the other part of their relationship with their students is their art as a teacher and what they do in the classroom and how they create the dynamics of interaction between the students and their knowledge, you know. And that can be quite a painful conversation to have with teachers sometimes, because sometimes they do feel that they are specialists, and they are, but they need ideas for creating interaction. And that's part of the course. You know, we go through that provision of these ideas for the teachers, and I hope in a as friendly a way as possible. You know, so that the experiences are good for them. And my message to the teachers is always take what you like, take what you feel can work in your particular context. And don't feel obliged to try and do everything. If you are a teacher who has to deliver a lot of theoretical knowledge, think about your presentation techniques. Think about the language you use while you're presenting and the structures within your slides that can that's a very good step.
So do you feel that those teachers in your courses, the longer they are with you, the broader the range of their different ideas and activities they apply?
Yeah, well, we make them, actually, because the way the course is set up, we start with the building blocks in the first 2 modules. In Module 1, I decided to look at guiding students through content input, so that would be multimedia or text input or other forms of input in the classroom. And then in Module 2, we look at student output, so helping students speak and write in subjects. Along the way, we look at specific vocabulary and general academic language. In a nutshell, that's what the first 2 modules are about. So their assignment work focuses on those areas along the way, and it's a cumulative as they go through these modules into Module 3, where they create a sequence of lessons based on these principles that they've seen.
Do you ever talk about assessing students' language?
We do. We talk about it, but it's not a key component of the course, because of course we get so many diverse subjects in one group. Just last week I was working with the HAC and HTL and HUM teachers, from sport in English through biology in English to engineering in English, computer science in English. So, it's all very different. So when we talk about assessment, we talk about it in very general principles. And my feeling and my message to the teachers, if they are assessing in any way their students, I try and encourage them to assess formatively, so that they're collecting information to feed into their future teaching. Because, of course, when it comes to formal assessment, the students here can choose, can't they? Whether or not they're going to be assessed in German.
But I guess that's fine with the teachers as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I do not feel that many of our teachers here would like to formally assess the language, because they think this is not really my job, right?
That's right. I think that's right. Yeah. So we're not just avoiding the issue. It's a realistic context that we're working in. And there are some countries where the language component is an integral part of the content teaching. And they tend to move towards more immersive teaching context. That's probably a good idea to clarify that issue. Clearly is not immersive teaching. Clearly is about supporting language along with the teaching of the content. Whereas immersive education looks at what it says on the packet. The students develop language by being completely immersed in the foreign language.
Keith, what do you think? Should we have a look at that very short video clip you showed at the conference, the workshop or lab thing, I remember?
Yes, in the engineering lab. It's a wonderful example of the end part of a process of lessons, a sequence of lessons, where the students are working with a machine, a filter press, and the students are explaining what exactly their experiment is. They're talking through it. And then perhaps we could come back afterwards and talk about how they got there, because that would be interesting for the colleagues.
Let's have a quick look at that.
Please attention. So first to begin, we open our rack, our filter press, and now it's already open, so we don't have to do it right now. So
here we will have our suspension, and our suspension will come through this pipe.
While Tobias talks about the other things, Eichinger takes our suspension.
Okay, here's the suspension. Here's the solid material. We put the material into the tank. In the tank is water.
Yeah, now we begin. Wow. And
the syrup.
Shake it. It will be good, so we can explain what other things we have to do. Now we have to add our mediums, our filter mediums, into between our filter plates. It's really spectacular.
Upside to the suspension.
Afterwards, we will press the plates together. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
In the meanwhile, Eichinger has already done the suspension. So it's really yeah.
Professional.
The next thing is that we wait. Finish? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So, now we put water through the system so that there are no air bubbles anymore. Okay? So we activate the compressor.
Or the pump, yeah.
Or the pump, yeah. By
Okay, here's the button, the red button, and the that side.
yeah. And now we pump the suspension through the system.
Okay, here we are again, the filter press.
The filter press.
What do you think of that?
Well, I love this lesson. I'm jealous of these children when I think, you know, they're studying machine engineering in a foreign language. Because my own background as a student was French and Russian and politics. And I spent a period of study abroad in France and Russia. But I know now that the best way for me to develop my languages would have been in a factory, working with native speakers or teachers teaching me a subject through that foreign language, just as we see here in Thomas's lesson. Because actually, to get to the laboratory work, I know Thomas took his students through several lessons, and it might be useful for the colleagues watching to hear what that process was. Sure. For example, for Thomas's Module 2 assignment, and we have his permission to show this and talk about this, which we're very grateful for, he prepared his students to talk about the filter process. And the filter process is a process which has, I think, 7 or 8 steps in it. And those steps are very clear. The way you work with the press, you go through these steps and create a cycle, and you start again. So he made his students watch the video, follow the steps on the slides, and fill in the key aspects of each step in a structure. I was talking about content structures. That structure was the handout the students got. That was one thing. Once they'd filled it in, and he'd checked with a volunteer up at the front talking through the process in front of everybody, then he got them to work in pairs and recreate a description in their own words. He provided them with another handout with the key sentences in the wrong order. The sequencing phrases are in the right order, so firstly, secondly, after that, as a result, but the actual descriptors themselves were mixed up. As a pair, they put them together, and then they practiced talking through this filter press process. And eventually, they did a lot of formula work as well to do with, I think, the time relationship to cleansing the liquid that's being fed through the filter. And there were physics equations to go with that. They did that. And then they went in the laboratory, and the students actually took measurements following the time, how quickly the liquid was filtered through the press. And the whole thing was a wonderful example, I think, of CLIL practice. From supporting the language, from processing the input in a content structure handout, to embedding the language within that structure, to getting students practicing, and then a real life situation in the laboratory, talking through the process themselves.
Let me ask you, probably this is kind of a critical question. Did those students have the chance to learn about the filtering process beforehand in German, or was all the introduction and everything given in English and completely new to the students?
I don't know the answer to that question. We'd have to ask Thomas. But I suspect not. I suspect that the whole thing was in English, because I know there is a tutorial video that he found on YouTube that he used with a little bit of history of the filter process and the machinery used that gets to modern day filter machinery. So I know he used the English input. Some teachers do ask about, what's
That's
the
the reason
role
why
of
I'm
German
asking, yes.
there? I mean, my advice, and it's one of the red flag messages as well, was to say to teachers, well, you decide, how heavy is the abstract content that you're trying to teach. And if it is so heavy that you need to use German and you feel your students need German, my advice is do it in German. I don't think there's anything to question there. But I would say don't repeat in English. Don't do the whole thing again in English. Do something different. Do something related that takes some of the concepts and takes some of the language and do that in English.
That's pretty often I hear teachers complaining about, first I do it in German because it's all that complex, and then I do a revision in English. So what I need is double the time.
I don't think, I wouldn't advise to do that. Because it's going to be dull for the teacher and for the students. But if you can find a way of looking at your curriculum so that you can deal with the heavy abstract content, if necessary, in German, and then do follow-up discussion in English, or do product creation in English, do presentation work in English. That works together. There's nothing wrong with using both languages, I think, as long as it's signposted. Not randomly mixing both languages.
Okay, by signposted, you mean what?
Well, I mean, a teacher may feel that the students are not following what's being said. It's not a bad idea in that situation for the teacher to say, okay, I'm going to do 2 minutes in German, and then we'll go back to English and cover the basic ideas in German, and then say, right, we're going to go back to English now, okay? And make sure everybody knows, trying to avoid this continuous translation that I have met in some countries, which I think confuses people.
Might well be, I'd be interested, what do you think of having a certain number of hours fixed beforehand for CLIL?
Sure.
Do you think that's a good idea? If at the beginning of the semester or beginning of the school year, I need to say, well, of my, let's say, 36 hours of history, I'm going to do 16 using CLIL.
It's a good question. It's a management question, if you ask me, because all these schools are very different, aren't they? You have huge schools with thousands of students and hundreds of teachers, and the numbers of teachers with English and the willingness and the ability to take on the CLIL numbers of hours increases with the size of the school. And there are other schools where there are very few teachers and they will need to do more. So that's a management question. However, I would say that it may also be a curriculum question where you have a subject that has an abstract content in it. You may have less freedom to choose what fits to do in English. That's another factor.
Sure.
As a department, I'd have the conversation as a group. I met the computer science teachers in Wiener Neustadt, and that's exactly what they did when I was there, was looking at who's going to do what in English, and they looked at what the focus of the lessons was going to be in English, using video material, for example, tutorial work. So I'm kind of avoiding a direct answer. I can see that. Because there are so many different schools.
Do I understand those teachers you were talking about, they could decide as a group who's going to do what and who's going to do?
Yes, in my experience, the coordinator, along with the teachers, it's a discussion that they have to meet the requirements of the number of hours in a given year.
So from the language learning point of view, would you prefer having big number of teachers doing their portion of CLIL, or rather have 1 or 2 only doing it all?
That's a very good question, isn't it? My gut reaction is to say I'd like 1 or 2 doing all of it, just because if that teacher becomes the teacher that students expect to be doing it in English, that's going to make things easier. Whereas if you've got a whole team just doing an hour a week, I think that expectation is less easy to set up in the students' minds. Plus, I think coordination is going to be easier. You've got a smaller number of colleagues.
Yeah, sure.
Teaching the same subject, they can share. They can share the preparation and resources. Perhaps stagger the way they teach so that they can follow on from each other.
Yeah.
You know, that's a good way of organising things. But I am aware every school is different.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith. I guess that was the first part of our live talk here. Time for our colleagues in the different colleges all over Austria to talk about what they've just heard, to discuss about stuff. Und Sie haben alle unsere Links bekommen zum Google Docs. Ich wünsche Ihnen eine gute Diskussion an Ihrer Schule. Und wenn Sie Fragen haben, Kommentare zu dem, was Sie jetzt gehört haben, bitte schreiben Sie uns. Wir werden also das live mitverfolgen und dann nach der Pause sofort wieder ins Gespräch einsteigen. Und Keith wird Ihre Fragen und Kommentare sofort live hier bearbeiten, beantworten. Wir freuen uns auf möglichst viele Reaktionen von Ihnen. Keith würde auch sehr interessieren, wie viele Sie eigentlich sind. Wir haben keine Idee. Wir wissen, wie viele Standorte zugeschaltet sind. Aber wenn Sie vielleicht nur eine Zahl dazu schreiben zu Ihren Kommentaren, damit wir auch ein bisschen einen Eindruck bekommen, wie viele Sie an den Schulen sind, die sich mit unserem Thema heute beschäftigen. Bis später.
See you later.
Okay, Keith, here we are again in the studio. Thank you very much, listeners, for all the interesting questions coming in. We are
Lots of questions.
This is overwhelming, I need to say, because we were not really expecting that. So we are trying to answer as many of your questions as possible. First one.
Go ahead.
How many hours of CLIL do you see it needs to sort of notice any effects on the students?
That's a very good question, isn't it? That's $1 million question, isn't it? Well, I mean, part of the answer is also to do with how many lessons of regular English they have.
Okay.
Isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
You know, if we talk about a grade 3 class, I mean, in your school, how many English lessons do they have?
2 per week.
So they got 2 lessons of English per week. And then they have a number of CLIL lessons in English per week as well. Goodness me. To have an effect. Well, in my school, I can't remember if I said I run a school. We have some children who come twice a week for 2 hours each time. So they have 4 hours a week. You can guarantee that the children who come every day for 4 hours and do 20 hours a week, within 3 months, they're functionally being able to process everything we say to them in the lesson. So of course more is better. But I think the answer really has to be, again, down to a management issue of what the curriculum is like, how many teachers there are, you know. And I mean, I would encourage schools to go as much as they can, you know. And I wouldn't worry about German, because I think as long as the strategies are there and the techniques are there for, you know, following up with German, then that can be language mapping in both languages. The technology is there to do it. Don't worry about it. The curriculum material can be there in both languages. I think actually do as much as you can. And there are questions of preparation. I know that. So it is a question of personal management, isn't it? You know, how much can the teachers cope with as well?
That leads me to another question here. A group of teachers, they say, you recommend having 2 or 3 teachers only, doing all those portions of CLIL within one class.
Yes.
But if you're, let's say, new to CLIL, this is a workload.
It is a lot to
wouldn't
do.
you rather recommend having a bigger number of teachers, splitting up the workload into smaller portions?
It is a
at
good
least
question.
For the beginning.
And I do see the point behind that question, the meaning behind it. Think about it this way: rather than splitting the time up into small drips, think about splitting it up into blocks then. Because if you have enough teachers throughout your 9 or so months of a school year, could you split it up into 4-week blocks so that 2 people are dealing with each 4 weeks, so they collaborate with each other, they coordinate with each other, but it's substantial enough so that there's continuity. That's the point. Because if it's drip feeding at such a small level, it'll be very difficult to have any continuity for the students and the teacher and the curriculum.
Yeah. Well, you know, no matter whether we are talking about 2 or 3 teachers or a group of 10, who are doing it. One of the crucial questions again and again is, where can I get material from?
Yes, yes.
So somebody asks,
yes,
where can I get input texts?
yes,
Be it oral texts or written texts,
yes.
which are, let's say, of the right level,
Yeah, it's a very good
comprehensible
question.
enough for my students. Have you got any ideas?
I do. I have lots of ideas, and I haven't come prepared with a, you know, with a slide full of websites and links for everybody. But my website, factworld.info, does have a links page, and I promise everybody watching and listening today, I'll write a news item on the homepage on my website, factworld.info, and I'll put in there some places to look for. Specifically here, colleagues ask about geography and history resources. But I would also say, you know, try to find out about other networks of other teachers. Are you connected with other geographers in Austria who are also looking for resources? Because I know there are a lot of them. And engineers who are teaching in English. We have a HTL CLIL Google group. The name is not that significant because there are Hack and Hum teachers in there and grammar school teachers in there. And it has 377 teachers in it. And they're all people who have been through these courses that I've been lucky to participate in. Are you a member of that group? You know, get involved in these networks so that you can begin to ask and share the load of resource identifying and writing. Just this last week in Vienna, one of the colleagues asked me, do you know any other sports teachers working in English? And I do. There's a network in Italy. So since Vienna coming here, I've put Bibi in touch with Viviana in southern Italy, who's a sports teacher in CLIL in English. And that's really part of the job for teachers, is to find like-minded colleagues, create your own community. For the geography teacher, did you know there's a large network of geographers working in English in Poland, coordinated by a good friend of mine, Ola Zaporucha. You should be in touch with them. You know, I'm saying should in a friendly way. I want to encourage teachers to try to create connections and networks with colleagues in other countries. You know, we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every lesson. You know, there are resources out there. Ola publishes her own geography materials in English for her classes in Poland. And so what I'm going to do is, although I don't have links right now, I'll write a little news item on my website, and that will be available to everybody. But I do encourage all the people watching and listening today, join the HTL-CLIL Google group, and there are already nearly 400 teachers in Austria.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's a promise.
That's yes, that will happen on my way home, probably at the airport tomorrow while I'm waiting.
Great. Well, next question. I was kind of expecting, coming back to the toolkit. Somebody wants to know, if I want to give kind of a lecture-like presentation, what are the tools you'd recommend? Easy to use tools to give a good lecture-like presentation.
Well, a lot of colleagues use PowerPoint, and a very simple piece of advice I can say about PowerPoint is if you use PowerPoint in print view, you can select how many slides are visible on a handout page. I think, you know, from 2 with notes to 9 small boxes of slides on the page. If you edit them with something like Paint or other image editor, you can put as many of those boxes on a page as you like. Make a handout with a route, a pathway through your slides so that they're numbered as the students will see them, and make notes following that sequence on that handout of 20 slides or however many it is. That is at least something that will allow them to follow through while you're talking and showing and explaining your content. There are websites that are full of ready-made PowerPoint presentations that are donated by teachers. I'll put that on the news item on the website, factworld.info as well. But I think the answer also has to be, teachers have to find ways. Simpler does not mean that there's less content. Simpler means more efficient presentation of content. And that's the secret, I think, for CLIL teachers, to find, it's not about you talking for 20 minutes on a topical issue of your subject. It's about maybe talking less, in fact, and getting your point across in less words, in a simpler structure, and captivating that to give it to students to follow. So I don't have any ready-made lectures. I don't have any ready-made structures. But I promise any teacher that sends me a slideshow from their subject, I'll have a look at it and I'll make some suggestions.
Great. I like the idea with the paper versions kind of thing that you can juggle around. Talking for about 20 minutes, you said. Somebody wants to know, what do I do if I need a word which doesn't come?
Okay, so
what do I do?
They stumble.
Do I switch to German, or do I ask my students, or what?
Personally, because I live in a Bulgarian context, I live in Bulgaria and I work with Bulgarian teachers, and I talk about education with Bulgarian teachers in Bulgarian, and if I get stuck, I ask them. I gave a seminar on formative and informative assessment techniques, and I found that I stumbled frequently. We still got through the workshop. They were happy, but I asked them, I don't think it's a problem not to know something. Don't worry about it. You're always going to have some students who are fluent. You may even have native speakers in your classes, That's the way of the world, really, isn't it? And I think, technology can help, possibly, if you allow smartphones in your lessons. You might have a word guru in your students, responsible for any new term that comes up and nobody's sure about. Let them check. You may even have technical dictionaries that you use online. Let them be the person staffing that word bashing during the lesson.
Well, as I said before, what I do in my history lessons, I pretty often put up words on the board just randomly when they come. I don't comment on them, but I'm developing kind of a collection of words just to make them visible. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's great. Language space.
Yeah.
Also for grammar, for structures that come up. Structures that are standard structures that everybody should know. And then a couple more structures for your higher language users in the class, because there will be some. That's a good aim for any lesson, is to have a collection of grammatical structures that people can use and take and use on their own. A space for it. It might be the blackboard. It could be a flip chart. Might be post-its. All the kids have got bits of paper. Any new terms they come across, quietly they come out and stick it up on the felt board, and then you can have a moment. We did have a question about error, didn't we?
That's actually the next one about grammar. Third person is still a big issue here in Austria. I don't know whether you care about that. I got no idea. But somebody constantly, or again and again, forgetting about that third person is.
Yeah. Well, I would say in the same way, the teacher can pick up on these language issues, and if you notice something wrong, some kind of an error that's appearing repeatedly, make a mental note, or even make a note, write it down, and come back to it at a moment when it's not interrupting what you're doing. That might be when you deal with the vocabulary on the flip chart or the felt board. You also have a section of it for working with error. That way you keep it anonymous as well. You don't upset anybody by focusing on them. So it's a great idea. 5 minutes at the end of a lesson. Everybody hears it, and you deal with it for everybody's benefit.
But you would not recommend sort of correcting constantly.
Not during a lesson.
No. As long as the message comes across, right?
I think it's a question of when and how rather than if, isn't it? Of course,
we are talking here about understanding each other.
Yes.
Not really about perfectionism, do we?
We often talk about the difference between fluency and accuracy activities, and if your students are into a discussion with you, or they're describing a process to somebody else, or they're giving feedback on a piece of work you've made them do, it's not a great idea to stop them and make them think about their language. Keep it for another moment, which is valid, but it doesn't interrupt the flow.
Great. Well, some of the teachers, they keep asking whether you know of any options to improve their own English.
Well, I have heard in the PPH Wien they do have language classes specially prepared for teachers who are coming for CLIL courses. I think on a Wednesday evening, they're every Wednesday, and they're open registration. You know, anybody can sign up for them. Within schools, I've been in schools. I've not noticed in Austria, but I have been in schools where they organise language training themselves. So the language department offers kind of extracurricular language for the colleagues. It's nice if you can make it a social event as well. In my school, I'm contemplating starting a course, Cooking with Keith, because we've got adult classes, and I know that I can get adults to learn English by cooking with them, because they're doing something rather than focusing on grammar and vocabulary. They'll be making stuff and they'll be learning language at the same time.
Okay. So I've been doing that at my own college for about 15 years now, cooking with Andreas, going for the beers with Andreas after work.
Okay.
Yeah? But we are meeting regularly, and that's the thing.
And that works in school.
Yeah, it does.
I guess it's a question of how to set it up, and you know, if there's interest there, then by all means see if there are the resources in the school and do it yourselves.
Resources. Number of questions coming in. Where can I find them? Do you know of any platforms? Where can we get information about that? Is there a written version of Keith Kelly's toolkit available?
Well, the technical websites, the colleagues who are engineers and electricians, they will know where they go for their resources. And there are some lovely video tutorials I've seen for engineers learning through English. But I don't have them with me. I have collections of websites that I collect from colleagues on the course. So what I can do is I can make that a document link in the news item or put on my homepage. So colleagues can go and have a look. But geography and history, social sciences, economics and business, there's a lot on onestopenglish.com. There's a lot of resources there. The Schwerpunktportal for some of the colleagues has a lot of example material.
So HTL specific stuff.
And just last week, I should say, last week I met a colleague from a HUM who teaches food, science and nutrition. She asked me if I thought it would be a good idea to set up an archive site for resources to share with colleagues. And of course, it's a great idea. Small amateur collections of resources that teachers share amongst each other. One becomes 10 and the work gets a lot lighter. The hardest thing to do, which is experience I remember seeing in northern Italy about 10 years ago, individual teachers with lots of enthusiasm for working through English. And it kind of fizzled out because they were left as individuals. In Austria, at least you have these networks in place for coordinating and sharing resources.
Another question I'm asking myself again and again. I'm not so sure whether you're too familiar with the hospitality sector, catering, tourism, so those HUMs. There's teachers asking, are there any subjects which might be more suitable for CLIL and probably others which are not that suitable for CLIL? Have you got kind of a list of criteria available? What makes a subject
Well, there are criteria, aren't there?
Suitable?
We've already talked a little bit about the abstract content in the curriculum. Practical work, workshop work, you know, the sport as well. A colleague said she thought her subject was ideal for working through English because it's so physical and so visual. And then, you know, those are two extremes, aren't they? So theoretical physics and sport, and then somewhere along the way, colleagues can place themselves in their subject. I don't have ready-made resources to share with colleagues. I think the networking, finding out who's doing what. There are publishers producing courses. The major publishers from the UK now have language-supported textbooks coming out. Publishers I've worked with sell these materials. But my advice to colleagues is to start in their own school, collectively. An individual teacher is always going to find it hard, really. And once material's been written, it can be recycled, it can be improved, it can be observed, you know, that's where you create a bit of a community. And I think that's, of all the things I think are positive about the work in Austria, that's the weakest link, is the supported networking for teachers. We try to set up these communications network, but actually the teachers themselves need to be communicating with like subject colleagues. If you're a geography teacher, there's another 20 out there somewhere in Austria. If you're an engineer, there's probably another 100 out there in Austria working through English.
Question coming in here concerning that, let's say at one's own school. Have you got any recipes ready how to motivate others to join the CLIL team? What can you tell them if you're the enthusiastic CLIL teacher, but you want to have some more of your colleagues on the team? What do you do?
Well, wine and nibbles evening, you know, an open lesson. If you've got a confident class of students and you'd like to show some colleagues, get them in and follow it up with a social event. Invite me. I'll come and visit. You know, I have visited a lot of schools around Austria for that particular reason, to try and get the message across to other colleagues in a school. Collaboration is an issue, isn't it? You know, the language department frequently separate from the content subject departments, and there's a lot that they can do together to help each other. That's frequently a message I'm asked to carry, is to you know, bring a language teacher with a subject teacher together. And of course, we've been running courses with this aim in Salzburg for the last 2 years. They find immediately how much that they can support each other with academic language from the language teacher and, you know, skills focus from the subject teacher. They can learn a lot from each other. A social event, that's my answer to this question. Make it light and attractive, and then those people who are not interested, they won't come. You know.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a couple of other questions which we might be able to answer sometime later. I guess we should go on watching the second part of your keynote from the conference. We shouldn't forget about that.
Sure.
Showing examples mainly, isn't it?
That's right, we've got teacher examples. So these colleagues have been given assignments to write, and what I wanted to do was to showcase some of the wonderful things they produced within their content subjects to develop communication, to teach vocabulary, to, you know, develop reading skills, and all the other skills that we put in the toolkit earlier. You'll see in this clip.
Great, let's watch that.
So what I'd like to show you, more of this doing the language within the content area, are examples from some of the colleagues' assignments. Let them speak for themselves, because I think what we see here is this development of the colleagues from the training on the course in Vienna. And also celebration, because they've made some wonderful things, wonderful resources, and I applaud them, you know, for it, and trying them out in their classrooms. Subject-specific vocabulary through articulate cards. Do you know what happens here? This is software development vocabulary. All this vocabulary is placed in these coloured cards. They're cut out, they're put in a pile between groups of students, and in teams, they pick a card. They have to explain either a programming word, a web design word, a database word, or a network engineering word, depending on the colour they have to pick up and describe. And if their team get it right, they get a point, or they move around the board. It's vocabulary, but it's doing vocabulary, isn't it? In a very interactive game. But I want to say, the word game is not a bad word here. What we're talking about is, and what have we got there? We've got 8, we've got 14, we've got 56 items of vocabulary, all being recycled through interactive communication. And a similar activity here from another assignment about the marketing mix and the 4 Ps. And what this colleague did was show a little introductory video from YouTube about the 4 Ps and the 7 Ps and the difference between them, and then hand out this sorting activity. And you can see here in the sorting activity, we've got the 4 Ps and descriptive cards to go with each. And the students have to talk and discuss and sort them out into the right areas. So they're doing vocabulary. There's a lot of vocabulary being recycled and consolidated there. Guiding input media, again, working with all sorts of media in the classroom, some examples from there. I put this slide up in a slightly sad way because I used to have one of these lovely clunky iPods from the early 2000s, and I left it on the plane. 60 gigabytes of my music life on the plane. But I was very heartened when one of my friends said, "Don't worry, Keith, you can do all that on your smartphone now." And actually, this slide shows that move to redundancy, doesn't it, of these machines, these media entertainment machines we have. But have a look at this, the clever way that we can embed language within media when we're guiding students through input. What we've got here, does this work? We've got a graph which actually just shows the profits, the sales that I've taken out. But have a look at the way that the language is made visible for the students. In year 0 to 1, we've got a plunge of profits. When profits hit a low by year 2, creating a trough, bottoming out, then beginning to recover between year 2 and 3. When by year 3 there's an improvement that we can see, levelling off up to year 4 when profits begin to rise, taking off between year 4 and 5, soaring further by year 5, evening out into year 6, reaching a peak up to year 8 when it begins to fall between year 8 and 9, plunging in year 9, going down further, declining when it decreases almost to 0 again by year 10. What a wonderful way of visualizing verbs, in talking about shaping graphs. And you know the great thing about it? It takes no time to prepare. If you have your slides already there to do with the product life cycle of an iPod, putting the terms is a procedural decision for a teacher to make on the slides. It's very useful for students. This thing, handed out, would be a very useful resource when they're asked to reproduce a description of a graph in their own words. We can add adverbs and nouns and adjectives as well in this way. It's a great activity. Some of the teachers, this teacher's to do with finance, simple interest board games, you know, like snakes and ladders. And here we've got some calculations for the students to do. They start down here with a dice and a counter, and they get a question. Forward, if you can answer 10% of 40, and they have to write out the process of their equation in this handout. It's a board game for simple interest. Simple interest board game number 2. This colleague made 3. And what we have here is a board game with cards, and the cards look like this, but they travel around in the same way if they can solve the question on the card. It's a reading game activity. They read, they move. It's a board game, but for finance. Why not? It's great. It's motivating. Guiding input through text. The teachers are very creative in their work. Dominoes. Dominoes with terms and definitions. And you can imagine, you don't need a lot of input to create your vocabulary with their definitions and turn them into dominoes, which in a group of 4 or 5 students, when they're handed out, and one of them plays the first one at the start, and it goes around the group where they're deciding which domino needs to be laid next, and they play them all out. It's a read and discussion activity. Here's a similar one. This is to do with job specifications. I thought this was wonderful. Actually, we have a job specification here, which would be nice to have the students read through, but read through meaningfully. And the way this teacher has asked them to read through it meaningfully is because they have these descriptions of skills and requirements for aspects of the job. And these descriptors go in the right place underneath these headings. The answers to this are all in here. That's a very clever way of making the students talk and discuss and sort and then check through reading along linear text. The general academic language, the invisible language of the curriculum, it's not the subject-specific vocabulary. Have a look at this. So, working with population graphs, pyramids. This teacher's produced a support sheet of all the language you need to describe a population pyramid. In fact, this assignment had 6 population pyramids, and the idea was that the students are given 1, and their partner had all 6, and the student who had the 1 used their language to describe it to their partner, who had to identify which one it was on their collection of 6. It's very nice, supportive CLIL material. I hope this is okay. I'm really enjoying showing off these resources from these colleagues. Wonderful work. Supporting written output. Again, with the product life cycle graph, this teacher not only embedded the movement verbs in the graph, in the slides, in a very meaningful way, but went on to get the students looking at, here we've got subject-specific terminology for talking about line graphs, so you know the language that you need to be able to talk about line graphs, but also the language that you also need to interpret graphs, talking about possible causes. Some of the movement is there, but the rest of the sentence allows them to draw conclusions from, to interpret the graphs themselves. So the causes and the effects. It's very nice. Makes me very happy. And supporting spoken output. Again, last but not least, you know, the famous information sharing activity, question loops. The way these work, you've probably seen them before. We've got questions, but the answer to this question is on a different sheet of paper. It's over here. The answer to this question is on a different sheet of paper. Each student in the class gets one strip, reads the question, somebody else has the answer, has to listen, answer, and then read their question. And we create a ping-pong effect around the classroom. Very simple mechanical speaking, listening, and reading activity. Information gap texts. I don't like these, but I show them with a warning to colleagues, and I say, please don't do too many. Your students will die a death of information gap texts if you do. And actually, in the classroom, the teacher in this assignment did say the students weren't happy with it. They were just showing each other and copying it in. But she did say then that when I asked them to apply this information to this graph with this support, this worked very well because it was meaningful. I think the information gap text idea is a bit mechanical and lacks a lot of meaning. But if you can apply text to graph, so transferring data into a graph with some language support, that's the students all performed in English, she said, and we're very happy to do that. Well, I thought, well, what am I going to say at the end of my slides to all these colleagues who I've been working with for so many years? And I thought of 10 things. It's a nice round number too. And these are very personal things to me, I think, from my view as the outsider coming in from time to time to work with these colleagues and visit their schools and see what they do. I would start in grade 1. I would start preparing students' academic English in the first year. Get the language teachers involved in doing that. General academic English through the language curriculum. Wonderful projects in the Basque Country, in the Ikastola system where Phil works, where the language curriculum is entirely made up of language to support the content curriculum. Imagine that. Textbooks written to develop language and skills that can be used in geography, history, and sciences. That kind of a project would be a wonderful step forward, I think, working with grade 1 students. I think also a system that monitors student language level in the schools, it would be a really useful tool for teachers and departments and managers in schools to have systems in place where you can do something about the great diversity of language level of students in these classrooms. That's a huge challenge for teachers to deal with, isn't it? When they've already got very heavy, dense content curriculum material to deliver. If they have to then deal also with this variety of language level of students, it causes extra weight for the teacher. Questions about who should come on the training courses. So far, all of our groups have been very diverse. We've had, mechanical engineers in with geographers, business studies in with chemistry. And there's only so much you can do with such a diverse group of teachers. A way forward may be looking at how you create your own professional development. So the 10 science teachers who put your hands up, what are your needs? Make them heard during the breakout sessions for your subject-specific meetings later, today and tomorrow. What's expected pedagogically in the classroom? In a classroom where it's expected that students are quiet and take notes and learn stuff passively, let's be clear about that. Let's talk about that. If students are expected to develop English, if students are expected to be able to speak in English, they've got to practice talking. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? I think about my dear wife on holiday in England for the first time. We went to Yorkshire, we went to Whitby, and she wanted an ice cream, and my wife has a Cambridge Proficiency Certificate, top grade A. Her English is flawless. She wouldn't go and buy an ice cream. She said, I won't understand. You go and buy me an ice cream. So what does that tell you about her language lessons? There was zero focus on dealing with error and misunderstanding. That's what it tells you. Your students, if you want them to talk, have to speak in class. And I think there should be confidence in the management of schools to decide which bits should not be done in English too. I think that is a valid management decision in schools. But the managers have to know that that's their job, you know, to coordinate with the CLIL coordinators how the hours are delegated. It's a management job. I think the identity is another thing that the colleagues could do with, you know, there may not be time and space for a department of CLIL, but creating some physical space where some of the books can go on a shelf, visual, where some of the copies can be stored so everybody can go, and a table, space in some way. Teachers need to have an identity within school. I think also this exploration, the thing I'm most happy about with the course that I've worked on now for 5 years is the wonderful confidence to explore in teaching in the classroom that I see teachers doing. That is surely a good thing, isn't it? Education is about change. And where teachers are brave enough to try and explore new things, we have to applaud them and support them. So the exploration and innovation is something that needs to happen. Publish stuff! I was talking with colleagues in Graz at the Bulm about the lack of resources they feel they still have. And I said, you know, well, can we write stuff? Can we write stuff and get an Austrian publisher to do a small print run? They may not make any money, but they may do it for the kudos. You know, they may do it for the prestige. Let's publish stuff that you know is great and you can use in your classrooms. Little by little, so that these classes are provided for, provisioned for materially. And share stuff, please.
Okay, Keith, once again on air, but very quickly, you can sit back and relax.
Okay.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich denke, dieser Ausschnitt aus der CLIL-Konferenz war eine tolle Collection of real stuff, was Sie da gesehen haben, und wir laden Sie jetzt noch einmal ein, in Ihrer Runde, in Ihrer Gruppe, Dinge, die Sie gesehen und gehört haben, zu diskutieren, auch zu diskutieren und zu überlegen, wie bei Ihnen an der Schule CLIL am besten umgesetzt werden kann, abhängig vielleicht davon, ob Sie jetzt neu sind in der CLIL-Gruppe oder ob Sie vielleicht schon viel Erfahrung mitbringen. Uns würde auch interessieren, wenn Sie Fragen haben zur Implementierung von CLIL an Ihren eigenen Schulen. Wie kann das ablaufen? Wer ist da wofür zuständig? Wer kann welche Beiträge dazu liefern? Sie haben von uns im Vorhinein schon eine Arbeitsfolie bekommen, die Keith Kelly für uns gestaltet hat, mit 10 Steps of how to implement CLIL successfully. Und unsere Diskussionsrunde oder Ihre Diskussionsrunde dauert so wie beim letzten Mal wieder 15 Minuten. Und wir erwarten schon gespannt Ihre Kommentare und Ihre Fragen. Okay, here we are again. And well, before we get on answering your new questions and comments, there's another promise. There's been so many questions coming in and comments coming in. We simply cannot answer them all here in the studio. But we'll let you know, okay? So we're going to keep record of all the comments, questions which have been coming in, and Keith and I will be sitting together and we will give you the answers Just give me a couple of days to think about how we're going to do that, but you'll get the answer. Okay?
Yes.
Well, second round. Coming back to that slide.
The 10
Point
steps.
number 2.
Yes.
Set up systems for monitoring students, it says. And some teachers keep asking, well, what does that actually mean? Here, Keith is talking about monitoring language levels. On the other hand, we say do not assess them. Probably what is meant, do not grade them. How does that go together?
Yeah,
How do you
sure.
monitor without grading?
I agree. It isn't that clear in a sentence. You know, that's one of the symptoms of putting it in a sentence. But I do meet teachers who complain that they've got a class with a wide variety of language levels in one group. And that can't be conducive to delivering a content lesson in a foreign language. So in monitoring, the context I was thinking of is before grade 3. My feeling was that there should be some system in place to give the school an idea of language levels of students who are going into CLIL classes. And I've always felt that grade 3 is too late. If you've got some students who come into grade 3 who are beginners alongside some students who are already, you know, B2, C1 level speakers of English, users of English, that's going to cause a lot of problems for the teachers. So I was thinking of beforehand.
Okay.
In grade 1, think about a route, a pathway, a language route and pathway that involves the language teachers, that it may even be selective. Now, I know that's not going to be well received by many quarters in Austria, but getting to the point where a class can cope with part of the curriculum for 72 hours in English should have some levelling effect of language for the students.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It's not fair on the students who are assumed to be able to do this if they're in the class where the level of English is so high. It needs to be monitored early.
Let me ask you a question concerning that. You know that we've made CLIL compulsory as a compulsory element of learning and teaching in technical colleges and those for agriculture and forestry from year 3 on. Do you think there's any subjects in years 1 and 2 which are perfectly suitable for introducing CLIL, so bits by bits?
Yeah, well, I think the traditional curriculum subjects, social science subjects and the natural science subjects, I'd say maths, but I know maths is a big issue. I know we've got some maths teachers in the audience. It would be interesting to hear what they think. If their subject is suitable for teaching through English. I lean towards the colleagues who believe it is, because it's very formulaic. There's very little redundant language in maths. And that means, I think, you can limit the language you're using in a maths lesson, which is good for language acquisition. Whereas in a social science lesson, there's lots of peripheral language. There's lots of discussion around the issues, which can be a heavier load for some. Less easy to plot is what I was thinking.
Are we talking about history and geography, for example?
In a way that, you know, the natural sciences are more formulaic. The language is immediately related to the content material, whereas in a geography lesson, you might be looking at economic issues, and those issues can be many issues that are not specified in the curriculum. And that takes you outside. You know, if you're talking about urbanization, for example, many factors contribute to city growth. In a way that the natural science subjects tend not to have that freedom of language outside the curriculum areas. So I would say, yes, I think there are some that would allow the schools to be more selective with CLIL early, but it needs to happen. It's too late in grade 3 for many students.
And I guess there's quite a lot of material available for subjects
already,
like geography and history. That's easier to find, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I've written some myself with publishers. All the major British publishers now have in their catalogue resources for, if they're not called CLIL, they're called EAL, English as an Additional Language, or they're aimed at the International Baccalaureate network of schools, so the expat community. And you find there's a lot of language focus in these books. And there are a lot of German publishers producing books for these audiences as well.
Talking about language skills of teachers, what do you think of setting up kind of a language course within a college? Are there any formats you know of that are most suitable, or?
I haven't had any personal contact with such courses, but I think the best way to do something like that would be with the language department talking to the subject teachers and seeing what their needs are. I mean, a huge area of overlap for me is what I call general academic language. And so the content teachers have their subject-specific language, you know, the kind of the stuff that you get in the glossary at the back of the book. And the language teachers don't really have any contact with that. They tend to have a more general curriculum that deals with more general vocabulary. But the academic language, both areas deal with cause-effect. Both areas deal with hypothesis. Both areas deal with, you know, descriptive language, comparing, contrasting. And that language overlap allows communication between the two curriculum areas. And I think the way the language teachers can usefully help the subject teachers is to teach them academic English.
Could you just give me one or two simple examples of what you mean by academic language?
Yeah.
It took me quite some time to find out actually what is meant by academic language. It sounds that complex.
Well, a very good explanation can be given with, you can imagine students going to universities, so non-native English speaking students going to a university in a country with lots of other non-native English speakers, so Austrians with Chinese. Within their economics department, there will be a language department feeding language into that economics department. English for additional purposes, for academic purposes, EAP. A very famous PhD study was done called the Academic Word List, which looked at language these students need to help them deal with business, medicine, law through English as a foreign language. That's not been done at a secondary level. I've started working on a document I call the language audit, and it's basically full of functions of language, such as describing cause-effect, presenting a hypothesis. There are hundreds and hundreds of these functions throughout the curriculum content area. Look at your Operatoren and you will see, analyze. Look, what is the language of analysis? And if that language has been identified, it can easily be given to teachers as a reference list, so that while they're teaching their content material and students have to analyze and summarize, they know what language to give students to help them present their analysis and summary. I can't share that document because I use material from other places, but I'm quite happy to let it be available privately within the Hata El CLIL Google group, for example. I've shared it with colleagues there. So that language is language that the language teachers frequently teach in their language textbooks. There'll be how to write an argumentative essay, so giving opinions for and against. There'll be process language somewhere within the language curriculum. And that's very useful for the subject teachers. What needs to be done is looking at where the curricula overlap. And that would help, actually, if the schools are deciding what to do CLIL in throughout the year, bring the language teachers in at the same time when they have that meeting, so they can say, oh, here we've got this hypothesis going on in this subject, in this unit, can you do that there? Do it at the same time. Join it up, and it makes everybody be singing from the same song sheet, so to speak.
We could probably link that up to one of those questions coming in here, referring to the number 5 statement. Decide not to teach certain subjects in English if conditions dictate.
Yeah, sure.
We are not quite sure
what those conditions are. Well, I was thinking of, I remember I met a physics teacher working within construction engineering, talking to me about stress, teaching students about concrete stress and metal stress within buildings, new builds. And there's a lot of very theoretical physics in this subject area. Well, my feeling is the schools should feel completely at liberty to choose not to teach those very theoretical areas in English. And then leave the CLIL for more accessible aspects of the curriculum. You know, why do it in English if it's already very challenging in German? You know, I don't think anybody's saying you've got to do this, you've got to do it all in English. It's also a managerial question, isn't it? That the directors need to be aware and sensitive enough to be able to tell teachers, you know, leave that. Let's do this part of the curriculum.
There's a question which has come in referring to the role of CLIL coordinators. You know, probably we need to say for those who haven't got any CLIL coordinators at their schools, we got those CLIL coordinators implemented in those colleges in which we implemented CLIL as a compulsory component. What do they do? Or what do you think is their role within the CLIL community?
It's a very good question, isn't it? I mean, I'd like to see that role clarified more. I think it varies greatly what the coordinators do or don't do, you know, for whatever reason. But they do need a bit of a job description. And I think in a school where you've got a handful of teachers of the same subject, all contributing to CLIL, their subject in English, the role of the coordinator is finding resources for them. Finding out what events are going on that are relevant to their subject. What other next works there are in other countries that they could usefully link up with. Are there any journals published in English in that subject area that the school could buy and put in their library? Coordinating resources in the school. You know, is there a section in the library called CLIL? There should be, and the CLIL coordinator should have the if you like, the responsibility, but also the trust to be building that, and the budget to build that section in the library as well.
You mentioned before that you were visiting schools here in Austria. Have you seen any CLIL libraries that you'd call?
No, not at all.
Okay, that's disappointing because I wanted to ask you, what do they actually look like? What do you find in a CLIL library?
It's a good question, isn't it?
So if we wanted to put up one, what would you put into
let's
that
think
CLIL
about
library?
it. I mean, I would say, I mean, in your school, for example, I know you share a suggestive book list for engineering subjects. And that's available in the Schwerpunkt portal, I think.
That's right, and in the guidelines for technical colleges, and actually the guidelines for agriculture and forestry, they got their own books list in the back of that booklet.
So English medium books that are relevant to the curriculum, that's one thing. I would say they should have at least a copy of all the major CLIL handbooks for teachers that are out there. And I've been involved in one for OUP, Cambridge has one, Macmillan have one, and there are others out there too. So the CLIL coordinator really needs to know what these works of literature are. Ideas books for teachers. So the language teachers will have books at home that they use for communication, that they use for developing advanced writing skills. Some of those need to go in the CLIL section as well, so that when the subject teacher is preparing a class for Matura writing, they've got some ideas from a language perspective on how to prepare students in that area.
So do I understand ideas books? I open the book and it gives me certain activities or ideas how to teach or go into writing or how to go into
there are lots of
speaking,
them out there. All the major language publishers have collections of guidebooks, handbooks for teachers, and they cover all aspects of language acquisition, whether it's language skills, listening, reading, writing, speaking, vocabulary and grammar, or technology in language learning, or culture, the role of intercultural competence in language learning. But I'm more interested in the skills, because the subject teachers need students to speak. So having collections of ideas of activities to set up talk is very useful. And it's like a recipe. You look at the key information at the top of the page and it says age, range of students, aims of activity, and it might say, talk in pairs for 10 minutes. And then it gives you an idea. Frequently with these templates and structures of the kind I've been talking about for guiding students through PowerPoints, you see them in setting up these talking activities.
So I'm pretty sure that my English teaching colleagues, they know those kind of books you've been talking about. if I were a math teacher or a physics teacher or engineering, which I'm not, would those books be useful for me as well?
Well, I would say,
Are they adaptable for those subjects?
I think they are. And I'm talking about a whole school buying one copy of there may be 5 or 6. I'll put it in our promised list for the news item on my website. I'll put a handful of books of recipe ideas for language activities. Because I have my favourites, and I bring some of these activities to share with the colleagues in Vienna. And then the aim is we manipulate the structure with content from their subject area. And that creates interaction in the classroom. It creates movement. It may be, you have 2 students with the same content, but the text has been manipulated a little bit differently in each, and they have to talk to each other to fill in what's missing. That kind of thing. Easy to do with any text. And I think subject teachers need lots of these. That's the kind of thing that goes in the toolkit. A 1-page list of activity types that you can find in these recipe books.
Might be a silly question, but so I find number of activities in those idea books when using English in my CLIL lessons. Would those activities be good in my German-speaking lessons as well?
Absolutely. I think they would. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing, if the aim of the lesson is, and again, go back to the Operatoren, and my German is really poor to have a discussion about Operatoren. But if you're told by your curriculum guidelines that your students should be able to explain something to somebody else, what better way to have them communicate in pairs where one student has some input material that the other student needs? So the explanation happens by default through the activity. And I think that's what these activities offer. It's really context and structure to set up interaction or to set up reading activities. Traditionally we've got lots of text with some comprehension questions in these content materials books. Why not have a reading activity where the whole of 2 pages of text can be transferred into a table of some kind? And then student A has half the information in the table. Student B has a similar text with the other half of the information. Then they've got to talk to each other and find out what's missing. You've got some reading and then shared information speaking. That way you get this explanation aspect from the curriculum.
There's one question which, this is probably about gut feeling, more or less. So you've been here in Austria for such a long time, working with teachers from very, very different colleges. Do you feel that CLIL might be a compulsory component in curricula of all the different types of colleges, or do you think this is specifically technical and agriculture only?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, I'm interested. This move now towards the agricultural colleges. What was the dynamism for that to happen?
Good question.
And I suspect that there's interest on both sides. That's the thing I value very much about what I see in Austria. The colleagues may feel that they're bullied a little bit into doing this, but in actual fact, what's happening is in Austria is you've got both a top-down and a bottom-up organisation, which allows for an organic growth. That's the truth of it, and in some countries that doesn't happen. I mentioned the Northern Italy experience I've noticed before, where individuals carry a lot of energy and invest a lot of themselves into their CLIL projects, but in my experience it has been individuals, whereas here we've got 377 teachers in the Google group. We've already seen in the groups of colleagues writing us questions, 23 people plus the principal, that already suggests community. And I think that's also part of the role of the coordinator, is creating this identity within the schools.
Talking about principals, school management, what do you think is kind of the responsibility of school management in all of those implementation processes?
It's a very, very good question, isn't it? And I know from talking to you personally, you relate very good stories about school principals being interested and sensitive to what's going on. And that carries so much weight, doesn't it? In a school where the manager wants this to happen and they're interested in how it happens. I mean, I think that first and foremost, understanding what CLIL means and supporting its goals, that's a minimum.
Have you got experience when it comes to that?
Well,
do you talk to principals?
I meet them very rarely, and
Okay.
I met the inspector here through you at your school, and I've met a couple of principals through school visits in Vienna, and actually the schools I get invited to are the schools where the coordinator is very keen, or the head teacher is very keen anyway. I rarely meet principals who are not interested. But I would say other things, you know, leading. Frequently these head teachers have English and they see the value in the curriculum through English. And there's a support role, you know, the head teachers talking to the coordinators about what they see their role to be. So it's all linked up, and we get away from this individual teachers carrying all the weight themselves. It has to be shared up the hierarchy in the school.
Sharing. I remember well, that was one of your major messages at the CLIL conference. Share. What is it that we need to share?
I still think that, you know, it's the weakest part of what I see going on in Austria is teachers, same subject teachers, not being in touch with each other. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of some subjects where there are these communities, and we need some mechanism that puts them in touch with each other and allows them to share materials privately, so there is no copyright question in the public space. And I met a colleague just this week in Vienna who's in a home teaching nutrition and food science, and she asked me, do you think it's a good idea if I set up one of these box folders to share resources with my colleagues? I said, yes, please do it, because that's exactly what teachers need. They need to see good examples, and they need somewhere quick to go, so that, you know, they've got lives, they've got children, they've got other things going on apart from writing resources. I mean, one part of the assignment writing in the course in Vienna, I feel, is helping them as much as possible to get this done in as easy a way as possible, so that they're not writing books at school. You know, it's small and manageable, and if you make small and manageable happen frequently enough, it very quickly covers a whole unit. You know, keep your goal preparing a unit of work over the next year, so that next year it's done, and then share that with somebody in the same subject somewhere else, so that they can let you have something they've prepared. If we can coordinate that kind of a relationship, very quickly all the computer science teachers will have a curriculum full of resources, all the engineers, all the technicians. But at the moment, there's still this kind of individualism going on, which is not healthy.
Thank you very much, Keith. That was just brilliant. I'd really love to be here. Great. And thank you very, very much for all the comments and questions coming in. And once again, we promised.
We will answer. We will answer them all.
And we'll deliver, right?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for being with us. Hopefully see you again in one of the next Sprachenforum. Not knowing yet what the program will be, but keep on CLILing. That's what we keep saying, right?
And keep in touch.
Yeah, keep in touch. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.